I'll give you a little background on me first. So Sub Rosa is a 10-year-old company, and we're about 50 people in New York, and we're comprised of expats from a variety of different disciplines. We've got academics, we've got entrepreneurs, hackers, makers, people who've worked in cities, people who've worked in corporations. And they've all left because, and found this weird little 50-person shop in New York, because they really want to think about design in a different way than they had before. And so, when the slide begins, I will begin. Well, actually, I know how it goes anyway, so I'll start while they're getting ready. The first thing that we do when we go in and talk with companies is we tell them, we're here to help you do something slightly different. We're here to help you think about empathy. And when you ask a company or an executive in the C-suite of an organization to define empathy, they're all, pretty smart folks. They probably scored decently on their SATs. They can define the term. But if you ask them, how does your company experience or exhibit empathy, they just glaze over. And they start to really think about, wow, we've never really asked ourselves that question, and we don't really know how to define that. But it's super important, because empathy touches everything. Without empathy, you don't have a good product. You don't have a good corporate culture. You don't have a good way to communicate with your constituent groups out in the world. So when we start to ask them, why is empathy important to their company, little light bulbs start to click on, and they start to realize where they lack empathy and where we might be able to help them solve for it. Empathy works because ultimately it seeks to help us understand people. It helps take us out of our own shoes and put us on the other side of the table. And in doing so, we can find new ways to develop products, new ways to reach new consumers, and new ways to build better businesses. So then we ask, who exhibits empathy? And the first knee-jerk reaction that a lot of, and specifically about companies, obviously, and the first knee-jerk reaction we get are companies like Google and Apple who have great UX, great UI, they make good products, they have a simple, clean message, so on and so forth, and that's good low-hanging fruit, and we get that out of the way. And then we ask them to keep going and talk a little more. And the kinds of companies that start to come up more and more these days are companies that live in the share economy space, companies that talk about collaborative consumption a bit. So Airbnb comes up a lot when we ask that question. Zipcar comes up a lot. And then also companies that are moving to more cloud-based systems like Adobe and others. And the reason why I think those are starting to come up more and more is because people start to realize that empathy in those types of businesses is both microcosmic as well as macro. It's about how am I gaining something from this experience, having a car share system that I can use when I need it and not have to own a car, but also how is my city benefiting from this experience, because now there's less congestion, because now there's more ease of use and things like that. So people start to really think about and redefine empathy in a different way because they realize that everything is an experience. The product is an experience, the brand is an experience, packaging, marketing, everything is empathetic. If everything is putting you in the shoes of the recipient and designing and optimizing for that, we can get to a lot better businesses. So how do you put the experience above all else? Two things we like to try to drive into almost every conversation is objectivity and feedback. Objectivity being get out of your own way of thinking and get out of the historical way of designing for yourself, which is what a lot of companies do. And then the other thing to think about is where are we getting our feedback from? I can't tell you how many rooms we sit in where the feedback loop is sitting in the room with us. There's no consumer, there's no third-party research, there's no field research happening. It's we like it, and so we made it and put it out in the world, and it should do well, shouldn't it? And that's not the way things are going to continue to work if they're going to be successful. So we've developed this four-step little framework that we use, and there's not marketing speak on this slide. It's really just truly four words everyone knows: behavior, relationships, memory, conversations. With these four things, we're able to really start to crack open a different type of conversation with our clients. The first is behaviors. What is the behavior or behaviors we're asking people to do? Is it consume a piece of content? Is it walk into a space and have an experience? Whatever it is, let's be clear about it, let's understand it, and let's look at it from all sides. What's the relationship we're trying to cultivate? Are we looking to create something that's very one-way, top-down? Are we looking to create something that's very flat and conversational? every company has a different aspiration, every product has a different type of aspiration for these things, but a lot of times they're not defined in these types of terms. So making sure that we do that helps people get very clear very quickly on the road to a better and more empathically designed company. Memory. What is the thing that we want people to remember after having experienced something with us? What is the thing that when they go to a cocktail party 2 weeks from now and they talk about this thing that they did or experienced or saw or purchased, how did that lodge itself in their memory? And did they remember the thing we wanted them to remember? Or did they remember some other thing and we don't know what they're talking about? And then lastly, conversations. What's the frequency? What's the depth? What's the tone of voice? These are the ways that people behave. These are the ways you interact with your friends and your family. But companies don't often think about this. So taking that theory and now applying it to a project, I'm going to talk a little about a company who, and this is completely coincidental, GE is not paying either of us to come up here and talk about this, but GE is doing a lot of work in this space. So it's an interesting assignment. So we've worked with them for going on 6 years now. And our job is very much sort of answer the open-ended brief. So we're not really building advertising per se. We're kind of coming in with a question or a secret that they don't want to kind of talk to the world about, and we're helping them solve it. And then after, if we solve it successfully, then we can talk to the world about it, which is why I'm here today. So they wanted to reinvent their medical imaging business. Third in category at the time, Philips and Siemens had more market share. And they're GE, they want to have the most market share in everything, always. So we needed to help them figure out how to do that. And when we start to look at the business, what we find is, well, medical imaging is very wide. There's a lot of different categories, MRI, CAT. It's too wide to go super deep very fast. And so we said, let's get microcosmic. Let's pick a vertical. And let's see what we can extract in terms of best practices from that vertical and help to solve for this. Now, in terms of market share, what we come to find also is that we can't really change the product because, much like we heard earlier today, it's a long product cycle. If everyone in this room came up with a better way to use medical imaging to detect something, it would still be somewhere between 6 to 8 years before it's on a patient working in a hospital efficiently. So if you want to gain fast market share quickly, product innovation wasn't going to be the first path we were going to go down. The second is price. No one wants to be in a race to the bottom, so we're not going to just undercut competitors and get more share by selling things for a cheaper price. So instead, what we did was we asked them to pick a category, and they gave us mammography, which I am clearly the paragon of women's health, and this is why they thought we would be the perfect fit for this assignment. But actually, we said to them, we may go in and we may find things that you're doing that are great, and we may come back to you and say, there's not much you can do. Philips and Siemens have better relationships with hospitals, and sorry, but that's just the way it is. And they said, we trust that you'll get a little deeper and a little further, and so we want you to do this experiment. And so we took this human-centered ethnographic approach, thinking about really how can we build an empathetic point of view for all the things that are wrong with the mammography experience. And how might that lead to key findings that we can apply elsewhere to their medical imaging businesses and ultimately drive share. And so we started by building a space. October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, in Soho in New York City, retail level, on West Broadway. And we invited everyone we knew, and we said, come in and talk with us about your experiences. And so we invited in the usual suspects that you would imagine, women patients, doctors, cancer survivors, and we started to understand what happens throughout this process. From the very early conversations, when you're discussing making an appointment with your GP perhaps, all the way through to waiting for your results, finding out your results, and then if you are diagnosed and have to go through cancer treatment, what's that process then like? And we learned a ton of interesting stuff. And when we started having these conversations, these were some of the things that came up when people think about mammography. Fitting it into their schedule. Not wanting to know came up quite a bit because it's sort of the way it's phrased is it's an appointment to find out if you have cancer, not body maintenance. Just the lexicon used in doctor's office makes it sound like I'm going to go find out if I have cancer. And that's inherently going to scare some people away. It's going to prevent you from going to get screened on a regular basis. And so when we go back to those conversations, one of those 4 verticals, we started to look at the lexicon. We started to look at the way people talk about this sort of stuff. And beyond the usual suspects that we invited in, we had a wide group of people from design workshops with product designers, spatial designers, architects. We started bringing in religious groups and religious leaders to look at how do different sort of cultural points of view play out when you come and get a breast exam, and should we think about that? Susan G. Komen's board participated. We had folks from the UN and high schools and colleges throughout the US come and contribute with us. And one of the things that we also did was we said, who are some of the unusual suspects? Who are the people that don't get invited to these types of conversations that should also be here? So one thing that came up in the research was that everyone hates the gown. Everyone hates the gown. It's a stupid little thing, but everyone hates the gown because it's immodest. It's a gown that you already had, that you get if you're sick. So psychologically, you kind of are already put in a position that you wouldn't ordinarily be in. And can it just be a little better? And so we brought in the design team from Victoria's Secret. And we were able to actually prototype and design, using this little research lab that we built, a gown that was the same price that hospitals pay for the other gown, but was a little more spa-like. And just that alone was something that was a small little tweak on the system that allowed them to do things differently. And we did field research in a variety of places, ranging from places where women have to make decisions about things that are sometimes uncomfortable, to spas, to a whole host of different places. And we really found and gleaned a lot of interesting findings. But one thing that kept coming up was this idea of pain, right? The number one reason most people don't get screened is because it's painful. Or psychologically, at least, that's the thing they remember the most, going back to that framework again. And so we started to ask the question, well, what's driving this pain? And presently, compression is the best way to detect breast cancer, and that's why the machines do what they do. The second biggest complaint was that the rooms are freezing cold. Every woman, I see every woman's head nod when I say that every time I talk about this, because it's true, the rooms are freezing cold. Why are the rooms freezing cold? Because of the machines. So you ask the technicians, and the technicians say, well, we don't really control it. Talk to the admin. Admin says, go talk to GE. GE says, talk to the engineers. Engineers say, optimal temperature for the machine is 64 degrees, plus or minus, which for a person in that stupid little gown is cold and uncomfortable and unempathetic in so many ways. And so we went to Memorial Sloan Kettering, who we were working with, and we said, we want to run a clinical trial with you and bring back 300 women who've been screened over the past few months, and we want to screen them at a higher temperature. Our hypothesis was, warmer the room, less complaint of pain, because generally you're more comfortable, you may not have such a sensitivity, the machine itself may be a little warmer, because the compression is still, the paddles are still cold too. And so we ran the trial, and the hypothesis became the truth, which was that by increasing the temperature to somewhere between 74 and 76 degrees, we were able to decrease the complaint of pain by almost 70%. That was not the surprising finding, though. The more surprising finding was that by increasing that temperature, we were actually able to increase the efficacy of the test by almost 10%. The fact that we discovered this is frightening, just for the record. But the reason why is because when your muscles are cold and dense and they're being compressed inside two paddles, they're not going to get as flat. And so therefore the light that travels from the top to the bottom can't as efficiently spread. But when they're warm and looser, they can actually get flatter, and therefore we can find more cancer in the breast tissue. Shocking. And all based on a question about how do we change the room to make it more comfortable for people? Because nobody sits in that entire process from engineer to patient as an advocate for the patient experience. It's just not part of the system. And so that's what ends up happening as we get inside these companies and we start to poke around and lift up this rock and look under this thing and find, really, we just haven't thought about an empathetic point of view for how we design our business, how we design our products, how we design our experiences for patients. And so after a lot of this research, we built this new journey framework, which goes into a lot of detail that we won't talk about today, but it took people through awareness, the appointment, post-appointment, the breast cancer journey, all of the things we could change and affect through behavior, memory, relationships, and conversation. Because we can't change the machine, because we have to look at this sort of soft science world of experience, how do we make this play out? And then we looked at things that they would change about the experience. And after a lot of conversations, what we came to say to GE was, look, we've developed in parallel with all of this an iPad app that now lets patients control the lighting, the visuals, and the scent of the room that they're in, which for a mammo isn't terribly revolutionary. It's 15, 20 minutes, you're in and out of there. But if you're getting an MRI or something and you have that type of control, if you're not a patient, if you're a participant in the experience, all of a sudden things can really change and improve the way someone matriculates through a process. The other thing we talked a lot about was how do we productize this? Because remember, going back to the initial brief, how do we increase market share? Because we found out all this really interesting stuff, but GE now needs to sort of use it for something to drive their initial request. And so we developed a plan and a prototype of this new exam room experience, and it was taken to the Radiological Society of North America's annual convention, which is Thanksgiving weekend in Chicago. So for those of you who are looking for something fun to do in a couple weeks, that's where to be. And it was presented there, and the findings were basically, look, GE is going to continue to make great products. We're going to continue to innovate. That pipeline is going to be a little extended because it takes a while to get onto patients into hospitals. So instead, what we're also launching today is a service layer to our business, where we will now go into hospitals, and we will design collaboration with the hospital, different exam rooms, different waiting rooms, better gowns, better art on the walls, a different lexicon that they use, all of this sort of stuff, so that GE adds a service layer to their business to support their product business and to drive a more empathic point of view. So much like how hospitals market birthing centers, and I want to go have my baby here because they've got doulas and this and that, now hospitals, 10 hospitals right now around the country have signed up to build prototype GE women's centers where this work and these findings are now manifesting out in the world. So it's always good to end on a slide with people smiling. So when we ended this project and we talked about the work, and these were some of our participants who went through this with us, we talked about what do they think that this could be useful for beyond just mammography and perhaps even beyond just medical imaging. And the thing they kept coming back to is companies, people, institutions, organizations, facilities are all lacking this idea of empathy in their design process. And so how do you bring some of that type of thinking? How do you bring that innate understanding of what's important to the recipient on the other end to the process? And how do you make something that was once designed by you through your framework, through your point of view, something that is designed with the end recipient in mind? So thank you for your attention.